Hey there, guys, and welcome to Trek Tonight. We wanted to lead in with our first introduction to the new Klingons. I remember that very well. Going to see that in the theater and seeing the new Klingons, and I thought, what a great way to open the show. How are you guys?
You know, it's another day here on the third planet from the sun.
Yes, that is true.
I concur. Doing well myself as well.
Yep. Scott Taylor gives us a thumbs up. Scott, good to see you.
Right. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. Hey, we're about to get some real cold here on the East Coast, huh?
Oh, yeah. It's supposed to go like 7 degrees on Saturday here in New York. And the temperature's really going to drop tonight. It was brisk today, I would say, because I had to go out to run a few errands. Not the coldest I've ever felt, but it was no summer day. Let's put it that way.
I'm up here in my Captain Pike mountain retreat, and I'm looking at the weather app, and you know how it'll have a little slider that says, it's going to go from, 25 degrees to 45 degrees. There's a little line. When you get to Saturday, it's just a dot, and it says 5 degrees. That's all it is. The whole day, just a dot. So,
there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I won't complain about the Colin Kingman anymore then.
Oh, yeah. Well, and Pontatani, Phil says we're going to have 6 more weeks of winter.
Yeah.
Phil.
Well, I want to know, though. Okay, so apparently there's also various groundhogs around the country, and one in California, I believe, comes from Smoker's Pole, California. And, of course, Pontatani comes from Gobbler's Knob. And I really want to know why these towns all sound like something dirty.
Well, the Staten Island Chuck in Staten Island sounds pretty dirty. Apologies to any of if you have any viewers on Staten Island. But we're kidding. We love you. Yeah, you're great. Anyway, yeah, they do sound. I mean, because I think like old timey people who name towns get bored.
Maybe.
There's Intercourse, Pennsylvania, and it's quite possible that was named for the idea of having a dialogue, but I doubt it.
Well, it is right down the road from Blue Ball.
There you go.
I did not know that.
They go in a line. There's Blue Ball and Intercourse, and it's interesting.
And then roll over and sleep, Pennsylvania. So anyway, we'll see. We'll see how many more weeks of winter we get. None of these rodents are consistent in their predictions. So.
No, I know. Yeah.
So are you guys trying to tell me that you're going to have soon conditions that mirror like Urapente, for example?
Yes.
Maybe.
Maybe without the snow in New York, but it will be as cold as Urapente.
Yeah. Or the planet that Sulu gets stuck on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even though there's a shuttlecraft waiting up in space.
Yeah.
It'll be as cold as Andor.
Send a long rope down with a cup of coffee. So,
it'll be as cold as Andor.
Chris, I want to compliment you before we got into it.
Yes.
For a great beginning of this week's show. The only thing that made it slightly better, I think, is if you had Klingons with 2 exclamation points, not just one.
Oh yeah. Well, I didn't want to get carried away, Joe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can.
Right.
Let's.
Yes.
Why don't because we got a lot of ground to cover.
We do. We should get right into it.
what the clip you just showed was the first instance of what was considered modern Klingons.
Right.
The ridges, that sort of armor tunic, and very much sort of what we see going forward for the most part.
Right.
The commander played by Mark Leonard, who also played Surak, and he played the Romulan commander in Balance of Terror. So he played two of the Federation's greatest enemies and one of its staunchest allies.
Right.
So he is unrecognizable under all that makeup.
Yeah.
But he still does a good job.
So, well, you also have the so you've got the ridge, you've got the wild hair and the snaggly teeth.
Yes. That is something going forward. They all apparently dentistry is not particularly well appreciated on either Kling, depending on who you're following, or Kronos.
Right.
Although Worf did really like his Ferengi tooth sharpener.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's a pattern of sharpening your teeth that gives them that snaggly look. There's one guy in that motion picture opening who just looks like his teeth are about to come out of his head.
Well,
I don't know whether you noticed that or not.
But I didn't notice that, but it does.
Guy on the bridge, he's got teeth. He's like, what?
Poorly fitted prosthetics. This was, like I said, this was interesting because it was, in a way, very much like old school Klingons. They're very aggressive.
Right.
They shoot first, ask questions later.
Clearly.
Very militaristic.
Yeah.
And they get their asses handed to them because V'ger is essentially God. But that's all we see of them. They'll they show up again in Search for Spock.
Right.
With Christopher Lloyd as the captain.
Right.
And John
I wanted to have a Christopher Lloyd clip, and I didn't get to it. But, yeah.
And John Larroquette is the one. He's the science officer, the only one who survives. Out of that whole crew.
And probably the only sort of reasonable Klingon on that ship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the Klingons are. It was very, but still, even though they had the new appearance, new uniforms, new ridges, and all, still feel more like the old school Klingons.
Right. I love in that moment where Christopher Lloyd's character is showing them the Genesis video that he's intercepted or stolen, whatever.
Yeah.
And he's asking them what they think. He speak, and John Larroquette says they can make planets.
Yeah.
Impressive.
Impressive, And everybody else sees it as a weapon,
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I like Crew's response too, is to paraphrase, is like, children playing at your feet, Federation flag fluttering in the breeze.
Fluttering in the breeze.
Yes.
Yeah. As your woman stands by your side. Yeah. Charming.
Your station.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. All the while the Federation flag flying. Yeah.
There was only one minor hint of Reverend Jim in Search for Spock with Christopher Lloyd's performance. That's when he says, "Tell me about your doomsday weapon." It sounded so much like Reverend Jim right there. He kind of slid back in there for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I always love Christopher Lloyd and everything. Oh, yeah. So I was really glad to see him. When they put him in as a Klingon, I thought it was great.
He was terrific. It was, but I feel like, and I say that especially because I rewatched the movie. Undiscovered Country is the pivot point for the Klingon narrative.
Right.
This very much reflects, the events of Chernobyl, because the moon at Praxis blows up. Spoilers for a, like 30-year-old movie or something like that.
Yeah.
And much like when Chernobyl happened, the Russians were like, no, nothing happened, everything's fine. Everybody's like, no, we can tell that there's a lot of radiation coming from you guys. That's not normal. And eventually they had to cop to something had happened. And Praxis blows up, and it's and it's sort of doomed for the Klingon people because their homeworld will be uninhabitable in 50 years.
Right. So, hey guys, I am terribly sorry, but I had my thing set on banners from when I was giving Paramount their shout out for the clip. and I did not see all these lovely comments.
Okay.
Coming in. So let's first off start with the return of Keith Jacobson.
Yes.
Keith, how are you? As he says, I'm back. And then Craig Lubin says, and now he's black.
Yes.
Now, I'm not really sure what this was. Maybe it says more about you, Chris. I don't know what that was about because we got off. We were just talking, so I don't really know maybe what that was about, but there it is. Craig is telling us that his New Hampshire town is being named to Roropentia after this weekend because it's so cold.
Yes.
It sounds appropriate.
Roropentia, New Hampshire.
Yeah, Roropentia, New Hampshire. And he does agree that Klingon dentists are terrible.
Yes. They lose a lot of fingers.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Craig's disappointed. Praxis explodes. Spoilers.
Yeah, spoilers. So
today is a good day to rinse and spit.
Yeah.
I like that one a lot. I got to tell you.
Yeah. It's a good day.
It was about how the names of towns with Groundhog Days are dirty. It says more.
Okay.
Me. Okay. Right. Yeah. Well, we'll all go to the Nobbler's Gob Family Fun Park, and we'll see what happens when we get there.
Exactly.
Might be fun.
Right. Yeah, could be.
So
Nobbler's Knob. Yeah.
So,
Nobbler's Gob. Oh my.
So this is
some of those sound like Klingon names too, actually. Now that you think about it. Gobbler's
Knob. Gobbler's Knob. Yeah. I don't know. My buddy Sean and I had a whole chat about that today. So anyway, so what were you saying, Leo? I'm sorry.
I was saying so it's very much like the end of the the Cold War.
Right.
And about how it is difficult for people on both sides to give up, like that long-standing hostility. It's like, what do you do in a time? It's like we, as Chancellor Gorkin says to Kirk, it says, it is our generation will have the hardest time living in this new world. Right. And Kirk sort of has to have that thing where he finally has to let go of his hatred of Klingons, blaming them for the death of his son, understandably, but it's like the guy who is responsible for the death of his son is dead. So, blaming all Klingons for that is not, super helpful or reasonable.
Klingon bastard who killed my son.
Yes. Yeah. And the only Nixon can go to China, the Vulcan proverb. But the idea of sending Kirk, who is this very much, anti-Klingon sentiment, old school, old guard guy, for this, that's the only way you have to do. You have to show that everybody's going to come to the table.
Everybody's on board. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody's on board.
Yeah. And Chris Mitchell gives us a thumbs up. Hey, Chris, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Good to see you. Yeah, that was a. I actually thought that was kind of an underrated movie. I liked.
It is. It is one of the. I think one of the. It's a solid, very Star Trek idea.
Right.
About peace and moving forward. It was very timely when it came out because it was, a little post, Cold War, but not, it was still very much something people remember. It wasn't.
You know what? In as much as The Wrath of Khan was a sequel to Space Seed.
Yeah.
I kind of like Undiscovered Countries being a sequel to Errand of Mercy. I mean, it's very similar themes there as far as the ultimate cooperation and weeding out of the bad elements that threaten peace.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, Joe. Very good point. Thanks. I have a little clip here just because I think that this is a fun moment. The movies, I don't know where they really fall in the history of all this, and I didn't end up clipping anything from the films. All my stuff this week was from TV shows, but this I think is fun because we just sort of talked about the motion picture Klingons and the change,
right?
Which we all at the time just accepted that. I remember. Yeah. I don't ever remember having a problem with it, but
no.
Anyway, here we go.
All right.
Clearly, we've been going about this search business all wrong, Chief.
You're right.
Why bother searching 30 decks when you can just plunk yourself down at the bar here and wait for Darwin to come to you?
We have reason to believe that he'll return to this area.
Ah, yes, the Ractagino.
A vital clue that others might have missed. How fortunate it is that it has kept you stuck at this bar for the past 3 hours, having drinks while we've been crawling through conduits.
My God, that's him.
Oh,
Kirk.
Where?
On the left. The gold. Just sitting down. That's Kirk?
It would be an honor to meet him.
Let's buy him a drink.
gentlemen, no one is buying anyone a drink.
He's right. We can't risk altering the timeline.
What'll it be, boys? And don't ask for Ractagino. If I have to say we don't carry that one more time.
Ractagino?
The Klingons.
Klingons?
Over there and over there.
Those are Klingons?
All right. You boys have had enough.
I love this. They all look at him.
Mr. War?
They are Klingons. And it is a long story.
What happened? Some kind of genetic engineering?
A viral mutation?
We do not discuss it with outsiders.
Easy, lad. Everybody's entitled to an opinion.
That's right. And if I think that Kirk is a Danubian slime devil, well, that's my opinion, too.
Don't do it, mister, and that's an order.
But you heard what he called the captain.
Look at the way Kirk is ignoring that Klingon. He's letting a security officer handle it.
Chief, are you sure that's Kirk?
Absolutely.
Why is he wearing lieutenant stripes?
Yeah, well, I it's a silly clip, but I wanted to throw it in there, and also because it's just such a well-crafted episode.
Oh,
it's awesome. It's one of the best ever, and I got to say, it's a very well chosen clip, Chris, because it addressed decades of like, well, why did the Klingons change? Why do they look different? Right. I just wish they left it with this.
I agree. They do an explanation in Enterprise. It's not terrible, but it's also, I'd rather it just sort of be a mystery. And I like the idea. It is complicated. It's a long story. We don't not discuss it with outsiders.
Right.
Because it's sort of like the monster you don't see is scarier than the monster you do see. You know, sometimes your imagination is better than any explanation.
Right.
Right. Well, I mean, as Chris pointed out, I mean, obviously we noticed that they had been enhanced in motion picture, but we just knew that it was okay. Better makeup, more money, better miniatures.
And I think that was our assumption. It's just interesting. And I know we've sort of talked about this briefly before. I don't want to belabor this issue, but it's interesting to me how that change everybody just went with, and then they changed them for Discovery, and everybody threw their arms up in them.
Yeah, everybody, just like wet themselves with anger.
Yeah,
after Discovery, I'm not a huge fan of the Klingons from Discovery,
right?
But they did seem very alien, and which sort of makes them maybe a little scarier.
I don't know, maybe, yeah.
Just to briefly touch back on Undiscovered Country, I said that is the point when the Klingons stopped being the sort of conniving, scheming plotters. And after going forward from that, once we meet Worf and we're introduced to Klingon culture through him and specific episodes, they started adopting this sort of like samurai / Viking aesthetic and this idea of how honor is the most important thing to a Klingon. Because those old Klingons didn't seem to give two triples for honor. Fred Rubin says, who could forget Chang, Christopher Plummer, in his rendition of Edelweiss? Yeah. You never heard Edelweiss, so you've heard it sung in the original Klingon.
The original Klingon. Yeah, exactly.
And that was also a nice little touch, very Star Trek thing to throw a lot of Shakespeare in there. And you've got Christopher Plummer and David Warner, these two classically trained British actors.
Right.
So have them do cool stuff like that.
Yeah, no question. Yeah. Exactly.
So,
well, I remember at the time, I mean, there was some concern about, well, this Worf character, they're bringing in this new Star Trek. I mean, they were concerned about Next Generation generally.
Right.
Not being Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. But says, what are they going to do with this Klingon in the TV show? I mean, they were worried about it then. It all works out. I mean, at this point, we can only assume there are multiple Klingon species.
Well, now Keith,
the rest of the galaxy for various reasons. You know,
Keith believes that if the internet, Twitter, Facebook had been a thing back then, nerds would have revolted over the new Klingons in the motion picture. I don't know. Do you think so?
Nobody I know had a problem with it.
Right.
I think that might have.
And we definitely classified as nerds at the time.
Yeah. From cradle to grave, you know. But I would say that, I mean, there's the fact that we didn't have that far-reaching sort of thing. But I'd be astonished if there weren't a faction of Star Trek fans who are upset about the new Klingons. If you recall, when TNG came out, there was a lot of backlash. They were like, "Who is this bald captain?" And you know, he's got a French name, but he's got a British accent. That doesn't make any sense. And everybody's complaining about everything.
Yeah,
I mean,
I remember you and I were in London. We were working on a film, and we were in London on a newspaper, one of those rag newspapers, the Daily Sport or something like that, had a whole article on it, and they were all like, "Oh, old Baldy," you know, and it's like, and this is Patrick Stewart, who is a British actor of some renown. So I don't know,
but you know, I mean, it was funny because he was a working actor and probably a well-regarded actor,
right?
But you know, the British tabloids are very, they're wags, as they like to say.
Yeah.
What was that? I missed that message.
No, it was, I hit the button and Keith came back up again, but we'd already seen it. It was,
but so I watched. I'm sure we've all did a little bit of our own research. I watched a number of TNG episodes and one episode of Deep Space Nine.
Well, let's talk a little bit about TNG, and then I'll let you go on to your picks.
Sure.
But we touched on this a little bit, I think, last week when we said that Worf was kind of the replacement for Spock, in the sense that you had an alien who was struggling with his identity.
Right.
And I this was the clip that I was thinking of even back last week with Worf and Guinan. And I'm gonna run this one.
You know, I had a bet with the captain that I could make you laugh before you became Lieutenant Commander.
Not a good bet today.
I've seen you laugh. I like it.
Klingons do not laugh.
False.
Oh, yes, they do. Absolutely, they do. You don't. But I've heard Klingon belly laughs that'll curl your hair. Your son laughs. He's Klingon.
He is a child and part human.
That's right. And you're not. You're full Klingon, except you don't laugh.
I do not laugh because I do not feel like laughing.
Other Klingons feel like laughing. What does that say about you?
Perhaps it says that I do not feel like other Klingons.
Program complete. Good game. Don't feel bad. I was doing this long before you were born. So how is he? Your son?
He is having difficulty adjusting to life on Earth.
Oh, I could see where it might be hard for the little guy. Living with humans, being Klingon, could be very confusing.
It will not be easy for him.
No, it won't. But at some point, he's going to want to know what it's like to really be a Klingon. Just as you're learning now.
Kind of laying some wisdom down on Worf.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That scene is very interesting because one of the episodes I watched was the one where Riker does the officer exchange program. He becomes the first, the XO on that Klingon ship, and he's in the mess hall. He's talking to these Klingons, and he's, you know, they're like, you're not what we expected. He said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, you have a sense of humor. He says, well, we kind of felt the same way about you.
Right.
And they're like, and these guys are all laughing. They're really taking the mickey out of him, but in kind of a good-natured way. Like there are two Klingon female officers in the mess, and one of them is sort of like, who was really heavily made up to be not especially attractive. I'm sure the actress was. You can tell that. But and there's another one who doesn't really say anything, but she's wondering, if you could endure her,
right.
And Riker goes like, just her or both of them, and everybody's like, ah! And they talk about how Klingons laugh, and they didn't think that humans laughed, or so it was kind of a, very much that Russians love their children too kind of moment between the two of them. And it's interesting how later on Worf was like, Klingons doing like, because as we've said before, everything Worf knows about being a Klingon, he learned from books, not from other Klingons.
Right.
So it's a very like almost academic, like there's much like how it was another character remind in a way Spock, the way Spock sort of fights with his human half is trying to maintain his Vulcan identity, fighting his emotions, which are presumably harder for him to do than a Vulcan would.
Exactly.
And meanwhile, I mean, along with the similarity, the opposite of Worf to Spock is reflected a lot in the first two seasons of TNG. I think of Heart of Glory, the first appearance of other Klingons in that.
Yes.
And he has almost disdain for them. Later, when Q returned and tried to give him a fantasy Klingon woman, I'll never forget the quote. He said, "She is now representative of a world now alien to me." He has distanced himself so much from his own people and his own world at that point. But I also find it interesting that concurrently in the original crew movies, we didn't see any real dimension to the Klingons till after TNG started establishing it.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Because they no longer were adversaries or like, they were now allies. There's a line from the Matter of Honor, the one with Riker, is the guy who's right under Riker, who Riker beats up in the beginning to establish dominance. Because he's asking him about his father, how his father got captured by the Romulans and got away, but instead of dying like a warrior, he's going to eventually die of old age, and how shameful that is.
Right.
And Riker's like, he's your dad. He's still your dad. And he's like, he says that Klingon is his work, not his family, which is something that will be contradicted later on, because it seems like the sins of the father, like this guy feels ashamed of his dad, but unlike Worf, who will later accept discommendation for his father's alleged crimes to preserve the Empire, that seems a very different, a real divergence in what Klingons became.
Although I think they were that way all along. It's just I think we saw a lot of posturing.
Yeah.
In comments like that.
That could be. Yeah.
Interesting in that first appearance of the other Klingons, and they're a little bit like old school Klingons because they have that sort of, that compartmentalized phaser or disruptor made out of belt buckles and bits off their their uniforms,
right?
And which seems like not an honorable weapon if you're like secreting components about your body. Seems like more like old school sort of like sneaky Klingons.
Right.
Of course, they were dissociated from the actual Klingon Empire.
That's true. They were like, we should go back to being like the way the Klingon Empire used to be, conquest and battle. And what's interesting, and again, this is a line I completely forgot at the end of the episode when he's holding his makeshift phaser on the dilithium crystals, and he makes a comment about like the vultures on Kling, as opposed to like he doesn't, Kronos had not been, had not been uttered yet as the homeworld, but they took the old Bible which the Klingon homeworld was referred to as Kling. So Klingons come from Kling, which is an interesting. The only time I think it was ever mentioned on screen.
Yes, yeah. Well, John makes an interesting point here. He says, well, Worf said it best that they don't talk about those Klingons, yet we need to discuss how Discovery Klingons are.
I think the Discovery Klingons are cannon fodder, honestly.
Why do you say that, Joe?
Only because of how they were depicted. They were the ones that actually went to war.
Right.
And they were just that single-minded compared to their counterparts. I mean,
right.
If you're gonna have an in-universe explanation of why we have all these different types of Klingons, that just makes the most sense to me that they were expendable in that sense.
Well,
and they do like the Remans were, for the Romulans.
Yeah,
sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, they definitely do have different personalities and traits that they and functions in some ways.
Right.
So yeah, that's an
in a way they're much more like old school Klingons in that they are somewhat devious. I mean, Ash Tyler, that whole thing. Again, I was never sure if they took that Klingon, that albino Klingon from the first episode, and then like skinned him and then put Ash Tyler skin over him. It seemed like he had like a lot of painful surgery with no anesthetic, which seemed sort of gratuitous.
Right. Right.
I mean, I guess it's dishonorable to want to have morphine and be knocked out.
Yeah.
But
let me throw out before we get into, because I know you have other things down the road. I'm going to throw out one more clip. This is another Worf clip, and in my opinion, this is sort of where he comes to grips with being more Klingon. So we'll run this one.
Frequencies
open, sir.
What is this? Captain Katemak, have you lost your mind? Halt your vessel and drop your shields!
What treachery is this? By whose authority?
I am Worf, commanding the Enterprise, and it is you who have committed an act of treason by firing on this vessel.
I have standing orders to fire on all Federation ships!
You fool! Did it not occur to you that the war would be over by now?
I have no proof of that.
Trust your eyes. Or is your brain still stuck in its long slumber?
How do I know this is not a Federation trick? How can I be sure?
Captain, as you are new to this century, I have tried to be patient, but I will tolerate no further insubordination. Drop your shields immediately.
And if I refuse?
Then die in ignorance. I can waste no more time on you. Phasers to full power.
Aye, sir. Phasers ready. Target locked.
You dare not destroy us! We are on a crucial mission for the Klingon High Command!
Has the tongue dropped its shields?
No, sir.
Very well. Fire all phasers.
Wait! Lower the shields. I yield command of the Tong to you, Captain Worf. Long live the Klingon Empire.
A wise decision, Captain. Commander Kalar will board your vessel and take command. The Klingon cruiser Prang will soon arrive and escort you home. And Captain.
Yes?
Welcome to the 24th century. I return command of the ship to you, Captain.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Congratulations. Very fine first command. Well done.
would you like command?
Comfortable chair.
And you wore it well.
Now, can we just point out right away that Susie Plaxton is probably the sexiest Klingon ever?
Oh, well, yeah.
And there's a quality you don't see very much up to this point in the Klingon history, is that grace under fire.
Yeah,
right.
Intelligence combined with sometimes brute force, whatever. Good combination.
With strength. Yeah, exactly. Craig says, first rule of Discovery era Klingons, don't talk about Discovery era Klingons.
Yes.
A little Fight Club reference.
Yeah, that was a very cool moment. That's a good episode, because we're introduced to Kalar, who will become the mother of Alexander later on.
Right.
And she's a great character. Spoilers again for a show that an episode that aired like over 30 years ago.
Right.
She is murdered by Duras, who then Worf, murders. And what's also a very cool moment in that is he goes over and they're like reject him because he took discommendation. Yeah. But he's Kalo is my mate, and they're all like, "Ooh." So he gets to fight the guy and he kills him just as Riker and Data and like some other security guys show up.
Right.
And the Klingons are like, "Yep, that's reasonable." There's no repercussions for him from the Klingon end, but it's a black mark on his record, and he won't be promoted to lieutenant commander till Star Trek Generations.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very different. It shows how different they are. Like there's a cultural norm for the Klingons that seems completely alien for us, because nobody else would be like I know he killed your girlfriend or the mother, your baby mama, but you can't just haul off and like stick him with a sword. So,
well, the thing about Next Generation Worf versus DS9 Worf, and again, this is an evolution of the character as well as the species. But in TNG, I mean, there was a lot of moments of that divide.
Yeah.
Even though Worf was the most acclimated to human culture.
Right.
Other examples include, for example, refusing to help the Romulan by giving him a blood transfusion.
Oh, yeah.
Because that would just go against, and eventually later he would acknowledge the Romulans as certain Romulans as being worthy. And by the time we got to DS9, we saw the Dominion War, we started seeing a big, more of a blurring of the lines between the various species, which is good. It's evolution. But I'm glad it was a very gradual process. It was more realistic that way.
Do we have a funny comment, or you?
It's hang on. Leo Jasek spoiler rants have no honor.
Come on, Craig.
Well, maybe Craig, you should have watched some Star Trek before watching this show.
Yeah.
Oh, look at my hair.
Whee! So
Klingon hair.
Here we
go with
there's
that.
Been a real,
mirror
like I said, there is a real evolution of the Klingons from their original sort of Soviet analogs with a bit of a Mongol horde vibe in their aesthetic, to the sort of
the Mongol horde thing aesthetic going on with my hair right now.
I've ridden many leagues to bring you this video show.
Well, I know until we saw previews for Picard season 3 that people were saying, well, are they going to screw up Worf by making him look like Discovery Klingons? And I knew all along. I said, no, of course not, because they've already have an in-universe explanation for the differences.
Yeah.
Right.
The only thing that looks like they screwed up with Worf is they gave him a mustache all the way across his lip instead of just on the edges.
Well, he's got a new look. Listen, if you watch TNG, Worf's hair changes like every season. Like he had this woven ponytail. For a while, he had that sort of swept back, sort of almost like Elizabethan era hair.
Yeah, well, don't forget the Buster Brown haircut.
He had a lot. He had a lot of different looks.
He lost his whole head after the first season.
the first season he kind of had that bulb head.
Yeah.
You know,
his forehead game was big.
Yeah.
But talking about, we get to see a lot more of the Klingons in Deep Space Nine.
Yes.
Because of the Dominion War, and there, there was a time where the Klingons were like, trying to stop the Klingons from doing so. They were like, "Hey, don't go to war over this thing," and their Klingons were like, "Nope, we're doing it. Screw you."
Right.
But there's an episode, I believe it's called Blood Oath, which was in the second season, and it was around Jadzia Dax, her former. Not the host, Curzon.
Yeah.
Was good friends with Kor, Kang, and my dear commander. It was Kor, Kang, and
Koloth.
Koloth, yes. All played by the original actors, but now in full, ridged glory. And it's a fun episode because one, they're all very different. Kang is very serious, and he's this, much like he was on the show.
Right.
Kor is a bit of a party guy. Like he's in the Hollow Suites. He's fighting this battle, a crucial battle in Klingon history over and over again. And Odo, and Quark goes to Odo because he's like, he can't get him out of there. Odo turns off the power. He says, you won the battle. He's like, I have, and he's also very drunk at the time.
Right.
So he sleeps off. But it was interesting to see them all come together. A real wonderful blast from the past, honoring, the original Klingons.
Oh yeah, I thought that was great. I thought that was fantastic.
Well, and again, it served to evolve those characters and the culture in particular. The only thing that bugged me at the time, which I've gotten over, but are humans the weaklings of the galaxy? We only live like maybe 80, 90 years.
Right.
I mean, I would think that Klingons would have like a really short lifespan, not a long one. But
they apparently have a long one because one guy, it was like, well, his friend was about 100 years old, and his other friend showed up, and he's about 150 years old. I guess Klingons live longer, although you think there are not a lot of Klingons like dying in their beds.
How old was McCoy supposed to be when he appeared on Next Gen?
137.
Right.
But he's atypical human. Maybe humans live longer generally, but I just thought I'm glad they did because I love seeing the characters. And they made good use of Kor after that a few times.
Right.
But I just thought I was like, okay, this is interesting. And again, when they showed them with the ridges and the new look, it didn't affect me. I said, okay, well, they've modernized them too. But of course they felt compelled to explain it. So now that they've explained it partially, I want to see a full explanation. I want to see Klingons in Strange New Worlds.
Right.
And I want to see, and the intriguing line from Worf in the previews for Picard is that he has embraced pacifism over irrationality.
Right.
Is that just him, or is that Klingons in general?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
It'll be. I'm looking forward to that. Sort of going to an explanation, and this is completely non-canonical. There's a man by the name of John M. Ford who died fairly recently. He's an author, and he wrote two, I think, of the best Star Trek novels. One was called The Final Reflection, which was a Klingon's autobiography. And one of the premises was that it was banned in the Federation, but of course everybody had copies and were passing them off to each other. And his explanation was that the Klingons we saw in TOS were genetically modified with human DNA, so they would deal better with humans.
Right.
There was the Imperial race, which is the ridged ones. Kor has a good character arc throughout a few more episodes of DS9. Yes.
That's correct.
Very true.
Yeah.
And they also, this was never seen on screen, but it was in the book, and also for the original, one of the earliest Star Trek tabletop role-playing games put out by FASA, and they had a John M. Ford worked on that, is there were Romulan hybrids who were there to deal with the Romulan border. And I was like, at the time, I was like, that's as good an explanation as any.
Right.
I still prefer Worf's trials and tribulations explanation, because
I do too.
I just, if you sometimes it's just better to be like, yeah, it's weird, and we're not going to talk about it. And you're like,
right,
and let everybody have their own fan theories, and for them,
Sure.
they're all wrong and they're all right simultaneously. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, they felt the need to do it in Enterprise, and that's fine. And just stick with it. Don't forget about it now.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a feeling in Strange New World season 2, we're going to see a little bit of maybe a transition explanation between Discovery.
I would have to think.
TOS Klingons.
Yeah, I would have to think we're going to see Klingons next season. I mean, they're just so prevalent in that time period that I would have to see them.
I hope we do, and I'm curious to see how they handle it.
Right.
The Klingons in Discovery were, in some respects, very different. I mean, I still looked at them and I'm like, yeah, they're Klingon-ish,
Yeah.
They kind of have a ridge, they were mostly bald, they didn't have any hair.
I didn't like how slimy and pasty they were. That was my only thing. Like, almost like fish.
I didn't like the damn subtitles personally.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, I mean, I will step out and say I wasn't happy with them and I didn't really understand it. And I felt like it was one of the symptoms of the overall ailment for the first season of Discovery. And that was the showrunners clearly felt, well, we're going to put our own stamp on Star Trek and make a lot of changes, and we're going to do our own thing. And I just don't think that's what people wanted to see. But
sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But at any rate, listen, guys, we have about 10 minutes left. I want to wrap up any important things you guys think about that we need to say about Klingons as we bring this to a close, and then we'll talk a little bit about where we're going to go next. So is there anything else that's I know Leo did some episode research, and Joe, I don't know about you.
Well, I mean, I didn't make a point of watching a whole lot just prior to this. Of course, I've seen everything we're talking about multiple times, and I'll just wrap up my views on the Klingon experience with this reiteration that they continue to be an excellent fictional culture and species for Star Trek to reflect our current times, and they will continue to do so. Sometimes they need to step outside the Klingon box, as it were, to go in a different direction. And sometimes it lands, sometimes it doesn't quite.
Right.
But you know what? I mean, I think we're going to continue to see very interesting things in the character of Worf and other Klingons, which I'm sure we'll see in the other series going forward. Right. And I even put out what I thought was a somewhat controversial statement last week about maybe they're even more compelling than Vulcans in that regard. Vulcans tend to be like more one-dimensional.
I was thinking about that because I was like, aside from Spock, we don't see a lot of Vulcans, but we also, I'm incorrect. One, because we got 7 seasons of Tuvok.
Yeah.
Right.
And I like Tuvok as a character because while he is still Vulcan, he is, his focus is very different than Spock's. He's not purely scientifically minded the way Spock was.
Main cast Vulcans are good.
Yeah. We don't get to aside from that one episode of Lower Decks, we don't get to see a lot of Vulcan sort of home life, although we got a bit of that in Enterprise in the 4th season.
A little bit. Yeah.
So I think it is maybe easier to write for Klingons because Klingons are very expressive people. Klingons don't hold a lot in,
Right.
Whereas Vulcan, again, creating a race of people who are purely logical and control their emotions sounds great on paper, but it is probably a real, challenge to play as an actor or write as a writer.
Sure. Well, and I'll put it another way, guys. I mean, for me personally, Klingons never really felt overused in the way that, say, for example, the Borg. Because again, it's kind of a one-dimensional track for the most part.
Yeah,
Klingons are built in such a way that they can be modified, or we can explore another facet previously unexplored that fit our current narrative, and that makes them very compelling. And
and because of the way in general they've been portrayed, even with the different variants, they're very colorful people.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot you can do, both with humor and excitement and adventure and battle and things. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do with Klingons, because they're colorful, they're boisterous and loud, and I mean, and so
there's
they're
that
exciting.
there's that Klingon cook who has a restaurant on the promenade on Deep Space Nine. He's like this big sort of jolly, like boisterous fellow.
Right.
And I'm sure he has a name. I'm not aware of it off the top of my head. I just remembered him. I didn't do any research on that.
Don't forget his Klingon opera. He sings that very well too.
Yeah.
Like, Klingon opera is another thing like that. It's like I think, much like Tindy, I think I might prefer Klingon, acid rock, or punk. Was it acid punk?
I think so. Yeah,
it was acid punk, and you got it. It's funny because the idea of opera, because TNG especially was very like high-minded. They had a lot of string quartets and Shakespeare performances. Nobody was like, hey, Jenkins from engineering is starting a punk band and they're going to be performing it at 10 forward. You know, obviously some of the things like you can't have somebody have a Beatles cover, like an all Telluride Klingon Beatles cover band. Because you can't pay for the Beatles music. But I like to think that not everybody is just public domain, drawing room.
Now you could have an all Vulcan Beatles band because they already sort of have that haircut.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah. They could do like a 1964 review kind of thing, and
this point is debatable, obviously, but I'm thinking right now that at least as depicted, Klingons seem to have a much richer cultural and artistic background than a lot of the other alien races, and possibly including Vulcans. I mean, after all, obviously Shakespeare was Vulcan, or excuse me, Klingon. I keep doing that.
Right.
But just to see some of their opera and their other things that amuse them and enlighten them artistically is interesting.
It's like the idea of a warrior culture sounds great on paper. Like, it sounds like so cool, but somebody has to like cook the meals and opera, be doctors, be engineers, so, it would be interesting to see an episode where you see some Klingons who are not warriors, but it's like, this guy's an engineer and she's she's a Klingon, opera diva, and or this one, what is Klingon theater like? Is it is like overly dramatic as human, sort of theater culture is.
Right.
You kind of wonder what that's like.
Yeah, but you have a janitor that scrubs the toilet with honor.
Yes.
Yeah.
And guys, can I step outside the genre for just a moment?
Sure.
I have no interest in this financially. I wish I did, but shortly after Star Trek 2, but before 3, DC Comics put out their first version of a Star Trek comic, which featured prominently as one of their own creations a Klingon who served, basically was a traitor to the Klingons and served on the Enterprise. And so if you can find those issues, that's a good forerunner to the Worf character, I think. So check it out.
Interesting.
Yeah. Cool. All right, guys. Anything else on Klingons before we wrap on Klingons?
No, I think we've sort of, hit all the bases on that. It has been it's been a long journey getting from there to here.
Sing it, Leo.
So I think the Klingons remain an interesting frenemy. Let's call them of the Federation.
Right.
So I'll be curious to see what we see of Klingons in the future. They've made brief appearances on lower decks, and I'll be interested to see if they show up on Strange New Worlds.
I really am curious to see if we're going to see them on Strange New Worlds. It's a very good point.
And we haven't seen them now in the future in Discovery, now that they've gone to the 32nd century, if I'm correct.
Right.
Oh, right.
Klingons have not shown up so far. So what happened to them? I'd be curious.
Yeah.
Well, I just have one word to cap up my remarks, and it's this. Kapla!
Kapla!
Very good. All right. What are we doing next week? I think we talked about doing
Mirror,
right?
Yeah.
That'd be a good capper to
I
the
think we're
series.
going to look at the Mirror universe. We're going to start with Mirror, and then talk about some of the other follow-up episodes from that and different things, ways that impacted the series. So that should be kind of fun. And then we go on to Star Trek Picard. Now Joe has a commitment to a program on another network, as they say back in the 60s. So Joe will not be with us for that series, but he will return, I'm sure, when we're done with Picard.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I guess we're gonna. I guess to fill those giant shoes of
Joe's. You guys be kind.
We're gonna bring in, like we used to back in the day. We're gonna bring in a variety of special guests.
Yes.
So that'll be fun. But at any rate, Joe will be here with us next week. So get your Joe fix next week, and we will talk about Mirror. Anything you guys have going on besides all this that you want to talk about before we cut out of here?
I'm still doing my Trek haikus.
Right.
Love them.
And I've, because of all the, without going into the details, there's probably people are aware of all the problems going on with Wizards of the Coast, and Hasbro with the open gaming license. They've blinked, because the community has sort of spoken, sort of I don't want to say lashed back, but, made their displeasure known, both financial and social ways. And I sort of felt weird about promoting a company, not the creative people, because I've, got nothing respect from them, and they're not the ones making those decisions. But it felt weird to continue to promote something which felt a little controversial. So what my D&D haiku, and I can't change the name because that's your name on Twitter,
right.
But I'm now exploring other tabletop RPGs, and I may branch out and doing more nerd centric. So maybe I'll do something when Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania comes out, which I'm very much looking forward to. Yeah. So, I did about 7 years worth of plus years of D&D haikus.
Right.
So it's nice to sort of expand out and do some other stuff.
Yeah, definitely. That's cool. How about you, Joe? Anything going on?
You know what? I'll just say it again. JoeTownsend.com is your one-stop shop for all creative works of Joe Townsend.
There you go.
There and
check it out. Check it out. There's lots of great stuff there. All right, guys, I am going to roll us out of here, and we will see you all next week. Live long and prosper. Have a great week. And next, I wish I could grow a goatee in that time, but I don't think I'll be able to. So
let's give it a try.
Let's try. Leo's already working on it. He's got his goatee. Leo should shave that off, because that would be the universe.
That would certainly be a
clean shaven
to a bit.
Clean shaven and a crew cut for you, Leo, for a Mirror Universe.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, exactly. Yeah. All right, guys. Have a great week, everybody.
All right.
See you later.